The morning sun cast long shadows across the Navy training facility as Marcus Thompson adjusted his recruit uniform for the 100th time. His hands shook slightly as he walked through the gates, the weight of his past pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy pack. At 22, Marcus had seen more darkness than most people twice his age. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Detroit, violence had been his language, anger his closest companion. The recruitment officer had seen something in Marcus that others missed. Beneath the hardened exterior and the record of petty crimes lay a young man desperate for purpose, for a chance to rewrite his story. The Navy offered that chance, but old habits die hard, and Marcus carried his demons with him even into this new chapter. Sarah Mitchell had been working as a civilian contractor at the naval base for 3 years. As a trauma counselor specializing in military personnel, she understood the complex emotions that recruits brought with them. Her office was located in the administrative building, a place where sailors and recruits came to process paperwork, seek guidance, or simply find someone to listen. At 28, Sarah had dedicated her career to helping others heal from their wounds, both visible and hidden. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at her office early, reviewing files of new recruits who might benefit from counseling services. Marcus Thompson's file caught her attention. His background check revealed a troubled youth, but also showed determination and intelligence. She made a mental note to introduce herself if the opportunity arose. Meanwhile, Marcus struggled through his first week of basic training. The physical demands were challenging but manageable. What proved harder was the emotional adjustment. His drill instructors pushed every recruit to their breaking point, seeking to identify weaknesses and build character. For Marcus, this pressure triggered memories and emotions he had worked hard to suppress. The incident began on a humid Thursday afternoon. Marcus had just finished a particularly brutal training session where his drill instructor had singled him out for criticism in front of the entire unit. The words cut deep because they echoed criticisms he had heard his entire life. Worthless. Waste of space. Better off on the streets. As Marcus walked toward the administrative building to complete some required paperwork, his mind churned with anger and humiliation. He felt the familiar rage building inside him, the same feeling that had gotten him into trouble countless times before. His fists clenched and unclenched as he tried to control the storm brewing within. Sarah was leaving her office when she noticed the young recruit walking down the hallway. His body language immediately caught her professional attention. The rigid posture, the clenched jaw, the way his hands kept forming fists. She recognized the signs of someone on the edge, someone fighting an internal battle. "Excuse me," Sarah called out gently, her voice calm and professional. "Are you all right? You look like you might need to talk to someone." Marcus stopped abruptly and turned to face her. His eyes were filled with a mixture of pain and rage that made Sarah's heart ache. She had seen that look before in countless sessions with troubled veterans and recruits. It was the look of someone who had been pushed too far for too long. "I'm fine," Marcus replied through gritted teeth, though everything about his demeanor suggested otherwise. "Just need to get this paperwork done." Sarah took a step closer, her instincts as a counselor overriding any concern for her own safety. She had worked with aggressive patients before and knew how to de-escalate situations. What she didn't know was that Marcus's triggers were different from the typical military personnel she counseled. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, one of the counselors here," she said softly. "I work with recruits who are adjusting to military life. Sometimes it helps to talk about what's bothering you." The kindness in her voice was like salt on an open wound for Marcus. Throughout his life, kindness had often been followed by disappointment or betrayal. His mother had been kind before the drugs took her away. Teachers had been kind before they gave up on him. Social workers had been kind before they moved on to easier cases. "I said I'm fine," Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly. Other people in the hallway began to notice the interaction, though most continued with their business, assuming it was a routine counseling intervention. Sarah recognized she was dealing with someone who associated help with weakness or vulnerability. She had encountered this resistance before, particularly among recruits from difficult backgrounds. Her training taught her to remain calm and continue offering support without being pushy. "I understand you might not want to talk right now," she said, reaching into her pocket for one of her business cards. "But, if you change your mind, my office is right down this hall. Sometimes it just helps to have someone listen." As she extended the card toward him, something in Marcus's mind snapped. The gesture, meant as kindness, triggered a flood of memories and emotions he couldn't control. He saw his mother's hand reaching out with empty promises, teachers offering help they couldn't deliver, and all the broken commitments that had shaped his distrust of others. The rational part of Marcus's mind knew Sarah was trying to help. But rationality had no power over the storm of emotions that overwhelmed him in that moment. Years of suppressed anger, pain, and frustration converged into a single point of rage that demanded release. "Get away from me!" Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the hallway. Several people stopped what they were doing and turned to watch the unfolding drama. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor, though she began to sense the situation was escalating beyond her usual experience. She had dealt with angry patients before, but something about Marcus's energy felt different, more volatile and unpredictable. "I'm just trying to help," she said quietly, still holding out her business card. "You don't have to take it if you don't want to." But Marcus was no longer hearing her words clearly. His vision began to narrow as adrenaline flooded his system. The hallway around him seemed to fade away until all he could see was Sarah's extended hand and concerned face. In his distorted perception, she represented everyone who had ever offered help only to disappoint him later. The moment stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Marcus's breathing became rapid and shallow. His hands trembled not with nervousness now, but with barely contained violence. Sarah, trained to recognize escalating situations, began to slowly back away while keeping her voice calm and steady. "Marcus, I can see you're upset," she said, using his name from his file to try to create a personal connection. "Let's take some deep breaths together and talk about what's bothering you." Hearing his name seemed to trigger something even deeper in Marcus. How did she know his name? Had people been talking about him? Were they all judging him before they even knew him? The paranoia that had kept him alive on the streets began to take over his thinking. Unknown to either Marcus or Sarah, their interaction was being observed by others in the building. Among those others were 3 Navy SEALs who had come to the administrative building on routine business. They were not yet in Marcus's line of sight, but they had noticed the escalating tension and were quietly positioning themselves to intervene if necessary. Lieutenant Commander Jake Rodriguez, Petty Officer First Class David Kim, and Chief Petty Officer Mike Sullivan were all veteran Special Operations personnel with extensive combat experience. They had also undergone training in crisis intervention and understood the importance of protecting civilian contractors from potential violence. The 3 SEALs had been walking down an adjacent hallway when they heard Marcus's raised voice. Their training had taught them to assess situations quickly and position themselves strategically. They could see that Sarah was dealing with an increasingly agitated recruit, and they began to quietly move closer while staying out of direct sight. Rodriguez, the senior officer among them, used hand signals to position his teammates. Kim moved to cover the far end of the hallway while Sullivan positioned himself near a doorway that would allow him to intervene quickly if needed. All 3 men remained calm and professional, hoping the situation would de-escalate naturally. Sarah continued her attempts to calm Marcus, unaware that backup was nearby. Her training had taught her that most aggressive encounters could be resolved through patience and proper communication techniques. She had successfully de-escalated hundreds of similar situations throughout her career. "Marcus, I want you to know that everyone here wants you to succeed," she said gently. "The Navy believes in you, and that's why you're here. Whatever happened before today doesn't define who you can become." But her words had the opposite effect she intended. To Marcus, talk of the Navy believing in him sounded like more empty promises. His father had promised to come back. His mother had promised to get clean. The system had promised to help him find a better path. All lies, in his experience. The business card in Sarah's hand became the focal point of his rage. Such a small thing, but, in his mind, it represented all the false hope and broken promises he had endured. His body began to coil like a spring under enormous pressure. "I don't want your help," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "I don't want anyone's help. Just leave me alone." The volume of his voice now drew attention from throughout the building. Office workers peered out from doorways, and security guards began moving toward the disturbance. The 3 SEALs remained in position, ready to act but, hoping civilian intervention would resolve the situation. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized the situation was beyond what she could handle alone. She had been in similar circumstances before, but something about Marcus's energy was different. She could see pain in his eyes, but also a dangerous instability that concerned her. "Okay, Marcus," she said, her voice remaining steady despite her growing concern. "I hear you. You want to be left alone. I'm going to give you some space." She began to slowly back away, still holding the business card but no longer extending it toward him. Her movement should have de-escalated the situation, but, for Marcus, it triggered a different set of memories and emotions. In his troubled past, people walking away had always meant abandonment. His father walking away when he was 5. His mother walking away into her addiction. Foster families walking away when he became too difficult to handle. Teachers, counselors, and social workers all walking away when the situation became challenging. Sarah's retreat, meant as a gesture of respect for his boundaries, was interpreted by Marcus's damaged psyche as yet another abandonment. The rational part of his mind that knew she was just giving him space was overwhelmed by the emotional part that had been conditioned to expect desertion. "No!" Marcus shouted, taking a step toward Sarah. "You don't get to walk away. You started this." The accusation confused Sarah, who had only tried to offer help. She continued backing away slowly, now genuinely concerned for her safety. Her training in crisis intervention had not prepared her for someone whose psychological triggers were so complex and contradictory. "Marcus, I'm not walking away," she said carefully. "I'm just giving you the space you asked for. If you want to talk, I'm still here." But, Marcus was no longer processing her words rationally. The combination of stress from training, triggered memories from his past, and the complex emotions surrounding help and abandonment had created a perfect storm in his mind. His body language shifted from agitated to predatory as his fight-or-flight response kicked into full gear. The 3 SEALs watching the situation unfold recognized the shift immediately. Rodriguez made a subtle hand gesture to his teammates, and all 3 began moving closer while still remaining out of Marcus's direct line of sight. They had seen enough combat situations to recognize when someone was about to become violent. Sarah's professional training told her to continue backing away and try to reach security or other help. But, her compassionate nature also told her that Marcus was in pain and needed help, not punishment. She found herself torn between self-preservation and her desire to help someone who was clearly struggling. The hallway had become eerily quiet as other people sensed the tension and moved away from the area. The only sounds were Marcus's heavy breathing and the distant hum of air conditioning. The afternoon sunlight streaming through windows created an almost surreal atmosphere for the drama unfolding. Marcus's hands were now fully clenched into fists, and his entire body was rigid with tension. Every muscle seemed coiled and ready for action. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her increasingly uncomfortable. She could see the internal battle playing out across his features. "Please, Marcus," Sarah said softly, making one more attempt to reach him through words. "I can see you're in pain. Let me help you work through whatever is causing this anger." Her offer of help, meant with genuine compassion, was the final trigger. In Marcus's damaged emotional framework, offers of help were always followed by conditions, judgments, or eventual abandonment. He had learned early in life that accepting help meant making yourself vulnerable to disappointment and betrayal. The business card still in Sarah's hand seemed to mock him with its promise of support. All his life, people had given him cards, phone numbers, and promises of help. All his life, those promises had proven empty when he needed them most. The rage that had been building inside Marcus for years finally found its target. All the pain, all the disappointment, all the broken promises and abandoned hopes crystallized into a single moment of explosive anger. His rational mind shut down completely as his body prepared for violence. Sarah saw the change in his eyes and knew she was in serious danger. Her training kicked in, and she turned to run toward the nearest exit or security station. But Marcus's response was faster than she anticipated. With a roar of rage and pain that came from somewhere deep in his soul, Marcus lunged forward toward Sarah. His movement was explosive and violent, driven by years of suppressed emotion and triggered trauma. In that moment, he saw not a kind counselor trying to help, but every person who had ever promised him something they couldn't deliver. What Marcus didn't know was that 3 highly trained Navy SEALs had been watching the entire interaction unfold. What he didn't realize was that his moment of violence was about to meet with swift and decisive intervention. What he couldn't understand was that his actions in the next few seconds would change the course of his life forever. The 3 SEALs moved with the precision and speed that their training had ingrained in them. Years of combat experience had taught them to react instantly to threats against innocent people. Sarah's safety was now their primary concern, and they would use whatever force necessary to protect her. As Marcus lunged toward Sarah with his fists raised and his face contorted with rage, he was completely unaware that he had just made himself a target of 3 of the most dangerous men in the United States military. His tunnel vision focused entirely on Sarah meant he had no idea what was about to happen to him. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change everyone involved. Marcus's pain and rage were about to collide with professional military precision. Sarah's compassionate attempt to help was about to result in violence she never could have imagined. And 3 Navy SEALs were about to demonstrate why they were considered among the most elite warriors in the world. The next few seconds would determine whether Marcus Thompson found redemption or destruction, whether his story would be one of healing or tragedy, and whether a moment of explosive violence would destroy any chance he had for a better future. The moment Marcus's feet left the ground in his violent lunge toward Sarah, time seemed to slow down for everyone involved. Sarah's eyes widened in terror as she saw the rage-filled face of the young recruit coming toward her. Her body instinctively began to turn away, but she knew she couldn't move fast enough to avoid what was coming. In that same instant, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez made his move. The veteran SEAL had been watching the situation escalate and was already in motion before Marcus fully committed to his attack. Rodriguez moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years training for exactly these kinds of split-second decisions. "Stop right there." Rodriguez's voice boomed through the hallway with unmistakable authority. But Marcus was too far gone in his rage to process the command or even notice where it came from. Rodriguez closed the distance between himself and Marcus with remarkable speed. His years of combat experience had taught him to read body language and predict movements. He could see exactly where Marcus was heading and positioned himself to intercept the attack. As Marcus's fist swung toward where Sarah had been standing, Rodriguez's hand shot out and caught the recruit's wrist with iron-like grip. The sudden stop of his forward momentum sent shock waves through Marcus's body and, finally, broke through his tunnel vision of rage. "What the hell?" Marcus gasped, suddenly, aware that someone had grabbed him. He turned his head and found himself face to face with a man whose very presence commanded respect. Rodriguez's uniform clearly marked him as an officer, and his calm, controlled demeanor was in stark contrast to Marcus's wild emotional state. "That's enough, recruit," Rodriguez said firmly but not aggressively. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, but there was also something else in his tone. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of someone in crisis. Chief Petty Officer Sullivan appeared on Marcus's other side, ready to assist if the situation escalated further. His positioning was strategic, blocking any potential escape routes while also protecting Sarah, who had stumbled backward against the wall. Petty Officer Kim had moved to check on Sarah, making sure she wasn't injured and helping her move to a safe distance. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he asked quietly, his voice gentle despite the tense situation. Sarah shook her head, though her hands were trembling. "I'm okay," she managed to say, though her voice was shaky. Something triggered him. He needs help, not punishment. Even in her moment of fear and shock, Sarah's professional instincts kicked in. She could see that Marcus was struggling with something much deeper than simple anger or aggression. Her years of experience working with traumatized individuals told her that his violent outburst was a symptom of much larger problems. Marcus stood frozen between Rodriguez and Sullivan, his wrist still firmly held in the lieutenant commander's grip. The fog of rage was beginning to clear from his mind, and the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. He had just attacked a civilian contractor. He had just assaulted someone who was only trying to help him. "Let me go," Marcus said weakly, though he no longer struggled against Rodriguez's hold. The fight had gone out of him as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind only confusion and a growing sense of horror at his own actions. "Are you going to try to hurt anyone else?" Rodriguez asked, his voice calm but watchful. He studied Marcus's face carefully, looking for signs of continued aggression or instability. "No," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't know what happened. I didn't mean to." His voice trailed off as the full weight of his actions hit him. Rodriguez maintained his grip for a few more seconds, assessing whether it was safe to release the young recruit. His experience with combat-stressed soldiers had taught him to recognize when someone was truly calming down versus when they were simply pausing before another outburst. Slowly, carefully, Rodriguez released Marcus's wrist. "Hands where I can see them," he instructed, and Marcus immediately raised both hands, palms open, showing he was no longer a threat. Sullivan remained in position, ready to act if needed, but his stance relaxed slightly. All three SEALs had recognized that they were dealing with someone in crisis rather than someone who was inherently violent or dangerous. "What's your name, recruit?" Rodriguez asked, though he suspected he already knew from overhearing Sarah's earlier interaction. "Marcus Thompson, sir," Marcus replied automatically, his military training beginning to reassert itself. Standing before these three obviously elite personnel, he felt the crushing weight of having failed spectacularly in his very first week of service. "Well, Marcus Thompson, you just made one hell of a bad decision," Rodriguez said, but his tone wasn't harsh or judgmental. It was matter of fact, almost conversational. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Marcus looked around at the three men surrounding him, then, over at Sarah, who was still standing against the wall with Kim nearby. The shame he felt was overwhelming. These men had just witnessed him at his absolute worst, and now they were treating him with more respect and calm than he deserved. "I don't know, sir," Marcus said honestly. "She was trying to help me, and I lost it. I've never done anything like that before." The last part wasn't entirely true, but he had never attacked someone who was genuinely trying to help him. Rodriguez studied the young man's face carefully. In his years of military service, he had encountered many soldiers dealing with various forms of trauma and emotional damage. He recognized the signs of someone who was struggling with issues far beyond military training stress. "Where are you from, Marcus?" Rodriguez asked, changing his approach to something less confrontational. "Detroit, sir," Marcus replied. "Grew up on the east side." Rodriguez nodded knowingly. He had worked with plenty of recruits from tough urban backgrounds, and he understood the kinds of experiences that could shape someone's reactions to stress and authority. "Rough neighborhood?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Yes, sir. Very rough. Marcus found himself responding to Rodriguez's calm questioning. There was something about the man's presence that commanded honesty. Sarah, who had been listening to the exchange while collecting herself, stepped forward slightly. Kim moved with her, ready to intervene if Marcus showed any signs of aggression, but she seemed determined to participate in the conversation. Marcus, she said gently, I want you to know that I understand you weren't really attacking me personally. Sometimes our past experiences can make us react to situations in ways that don't make sense in the present moment. Her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was someone he had just tried to hurt, and she was showing him compassion and understanding. It was more than he could process emotionally. Ma'am, I'm so sorry, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I don't know why I did that. You were just trying to help me, and I'm sorry. Tears began to form in his eyes, though he fought to hold them back. The combination of shame, exhaustion, and emotional overload was breaking down the walls he had built around his feelings. Rodriguez watched this exchange with growing understanding. He had seen similar breakdowns before, usually from soldiers who had been carrying too much emotional weight for too long. The young recruit's violent outburst was clearly a symptom of much deeper problems. Marcus, Rodriguez said, when was the last time you slept? I mean really slept, more than a few hours at a time. The question caught Marcus off guard. Maybe 3 or 4 days ago. Training has been pretty intense, and I haven't been sleeping well anyway. Sullivan and Kim exchanged glances. Sleep deprivation combined with stress and unresolved trauma was a dangerous combination they had seen before in military personnel. What about eating? Rodriguez continued. When did you last have a real meal? Marcus had to think about it. Yesterday morning, I think. I've been too nervous to eat much. The picture was becoming clearer to the three SEALs. They were dealing with an exhausted, malnourished young man who was probably suffering from unresolved trauma and had been pushed beyond his emotional limits by the stress of military training. Sarah stepped forward again, her professional training taking over despite her recent scare. Marcus, have you ever talked to anyone about your experiences growing up? A counselor, therapist, or anyone like that? No, ma'am, Marcus replied. Where I come from, you don't talk about your problems. You just deal with them. And, how has that been working out for you? Sarah asked gently, not sarcastically, but with genuine curiosity. Marcus looked around at the three elite soldiers who had just stopped him from committing assault, then, at the woman he had just attacked who was still showing him kindness. The answer to Sarah's question was obvious to everyone present. Not very well, he admitted quietly. Rodriguez made a decision. Marcus, you and I are going to take a walk. Sarah, would you mind joining us? I think we need to have a conversation about what just happened and what happens next. Sir, am I under arrest? Marcus asked, the reality of his situation beginning to sink in. Attacking a civilian contractor on a military base was a serious crime that could end his military career before it had even begun. That depends on several things, Rodriguez replied honestly. But, right now, I'm more concerned about making sure you get the help you obviously need. Sarah nodded in agreement. I'm willing to participate in any conversation that might help Marcus work through whatever led to this incident. Sullivan and Kim remained alert but relaxed as the group prepared to move to a more private location. Both men understood that they had just witnessed something more complex than a simple assault. They were dealing with a young man in crisis who needed help more than punishment. As they began walking down the hallway, Marcus struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of him was terrified about the potential consequences of his actions. Another part was amazed by the compassion these people were showing him despite his behavior. And, somewhere deep inside, a small part of him dared to hope that maybe, finally, he had found people who might actually be able to help him. Rodriguez led the group toward a conference room where they could speak privately. His mind was already working on how to handle the situation. As a military officer, he had responsibilities to maintain discipline and order. As a human being, he could see that Marcus needed help more than punishment. "Marcus," Rodriguez said as they walked, "I want you to understand something. What you did was serious, and there will be consequences. But I've seen enough soldiers to recognize when someone is struggling with issues beyond their control. We're going to figure out how to help you, but you need to be completely honest with us about what's going on in your life." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure he knew how to be completely honest about his experiences. He had spent so many years hiding his pain and trauma that opening up felt almost impossible. Sarah walked alongside them, her mind already working on assessment strategies and intervention techniques. She could see that Marcus was dealing with complex trauma that would require careful, professional attention. "Marcus," she said, "I want you to know that what happened back there doesn't define you. People can learn to manage their responses to stress and trauma. It takes work, but it's absolutely possible." Her words gave Marcus a small spark of hope. Maybe his past didn't have to determine his future. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't involve repeating the same patterns of violence and self-destruction that had marked his life so far. As they reached the conference room, Rodriguez held the door open for the group. "All right, everyone inside. We're going to figure this out together." The room was small but comfortable, with a table and several chairs. Windows looked out onto the training grounds where other recruits were going through their exercises. Marcus could see the life he was supposed to be building for himself, and he wondered if his moment of violence had just destroyed any chance he had of achieving it. "Have a seat, Marcus," Rodriguez instructed, taking a chair across from him. Sarah sat to one side where she could observe both men, while Sullivan and Kim positioned themselves near the door. "Now," Rodriguez began, "I want you to tell us about your life before you joined the Navy. Start wherever you want, but don't leave anything out. We need to understand what brought you to that moment in the hallway." Marcus took a deep breath, unsure where to begin. His life story was complicated and painful, full of experiences he had never shared with anyone. But, looking at the faces around him, he saw something he had rarely encountered before: genuine interest in helping him succeed rather than simply judging his failures. "It's a long story, sir," Marcus said quietly. "We have time," Rodriguez replied. "And, Marcus, you can trust everyone in this room. Whatever you tell us is about figuring out how to help you, not about finding reasons to punish you." For the first time in years, Marcus began to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone actually wanted to hear his story and help him write a better ending. The conversation that followed would change everything for Marcus Thompson, but he didn't know that yet. All he knew was that for the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who seemed genuinely committed to understanding rather than judging him. Marcus stared at his hands for a long moment, gathering the courage to begin his story. The conference room was quiet except for the distant sounds of training exercises outside. These people were asking him to share things he had never told anyone, experiences he had buried deep inside himself for years. "I guess it started when I was 5, Marcus began slowly. That's when my dad left. One day he was there, and the next day my mom was crying and telling me he wasn't coming back." Rodriguez listened without interrupting, his expression neutral but attentive. He had heard many difficult stories from soldiers over the years, but each one still affected him. "My mom tried to keep things together for a while," Marcus continued. "She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, trying to pay rent and buy food. But the stress was too much for her, and she started using drugs to cope." Sarah leaned forward slightly, recognizing the classic pattern of childhood trauma that often led to the kinds of issues Marcus was displaying. Children who experienced abandonment and neglect often developed complex emotional responses that could manifest as anger or violence later in life. "How old were you when she started using?" Sarah asked gently. 7, maybe 8, Marcus replied. "At first, it wasn't too bad. She would just be sleepy sometimes, or act strange. But, it got worse pretty quickly. Marcus paused, the memories clearly painful to revisit. Rodriguez nodded encouragingly, and Marcus took a deep breath before continuing. By the time I was 10, she was gone most of the time. Sometimes for days. I learned how to take care of myself pretty early. How to find food, how to avoid the landlord when rent was due, how to stay invisible when dangerous people came around. The image of a 10-year-old child fending for himself in a dangerous neighborhood was heartbreaking to everyone in the room. Sullivan and Kim, both fathers themselves, felt their protective instincts stirring as they listened to Marcus's story. "What about school?" Rodriguez asked. "Were you able to stay in school during this time?" Marcus shook his head. "Some of the time, but it was hard. I missed a lot of days because I didn't have clean clothes, or because I was too tired from staying awake all night listening for trouble. Teachers would ask questions about my home life, and I learned to lie pretty convincingly." "When was the first time you got into serious trouble?" Sarah asked, understanding that children in Marcus's situation often ended up in conflict with authority as a survival mechanism. 12, Marcus answered immediately. "I got caught stealing food from a convenience store. The owner called the cops, and I got arrested for the first time." He described how the juvenile justice system had tried to help him but had been overwhelmed and underfunded. Foster families had taken him in temporarily, but his behavioral problems and trust issues had made placements difficult to maintain. "I learned early that people who said they wanted to help usually had their own agenda," Marcus explained, looking directly at Sarah. "Foster parents got money for taking me in. Social workers had quotas to meet. Teachers had too many kids to really care about any of us individually." This explained his violent reaction to Sarah's offer of help. In his experience, offers of assistance came with strings attached or hidden motives. "When I was 14, I got sent to a group home," Marcus continued. "It was supposed to be better than foster care, but it was really just a warehouse for kids nobody wanted." He described years of moving from one placement to another, each time becoming more convinced that he could only rely on himself. He learned to fight to survive, to intimidate others before they could hurt him, and to trust no one completely. "The group home was where I really learned about violence," Marcus said, his voice becoming flat and emotionless as he described some of his darkest experiences. "It was survival of the fittest. If you couldn't defend yourself, you became a target for everyone." Rodriguez recognized the tone Marcus was using. It was the same detached voice he had heard from soldiers describing combat trauma. Marcus was dissociating from the emotional impact of his memories in order to share them. "How long were you in the system?" Rodriguez asked. "Until I was 18, Marcus replied. Then, they basically kicked me out with a garbage bag of clothes and told me good luck." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she listened to Marcus describe his transition to adulthood without any support system or guidance. Young people aging out of foster care had extremely high rates of homelessness, unemployment, and incarceration. "What did you do when you left?" she asked. "Tried to survive," Marcus said simply. "I had no money, no place to live, no job skills. I slept in abandoned buildings, ate at shelters when I could find them, and did whatever I had to do to get by." He described several years of living on the streets, during which he was arrested multiple times for minor crimes like theft, trespassing, and disorderly conduct. Each interaction with law enforcement reinforced his belief that authority figures were enemies rather than helpers. "I never hurt anyone seriously," Marcus was quick to clarify. "I got into fights, but they were always defensive. I never attacked innocent people or anything like that." Until today, everyone in the room was thinking, but nobody said it out loud. "What made you decide to join the Navy?" Rodriguez asked, genuinely curious about what had motivated someone with Marcus's background to seek military service. For the first time since beginning his story, Marcus smiled slightly. "I met this guy at a homeless shelter about a year ago. He was a Marine veteran, and he told me stories about his service. Not the war stories or anything like that, but about how the military had given him a purpose and a family. The veteran had seen something in Marcus that others had missed. Despite his rough exterior and defensive attitude, there was intelligence and potential that could be developed with the right guidance and structure. He spent months talking to me about the possibilities, Marcus continued. He said the military wasn't just about fighting wars. It was about being part of something bigger than yourself, about having brothers who would never abandon you. This explained why Marcus's reaction to perceived abandonment was so extreme. The promise of military brotherhood represented everything he had been denied throughout his childhood. So I got clean, got my GED, and enlisted, Marcus said. I thought I was finally going to find a place where I belonged. And then, you got here, Rodriguez said, beginning to understand the full scope of what had led to the incident in the hallway. Training has been harder than I expected, Marcus admitted. Not the physical part, but the mental part. When the drill instructors yell at me or criticize me, it brings back all those feelings from when I was a kid. All those people telling me I was worthless. Sarah nodded, recognizing the classic symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Marcus's violent reaction to her offer of help was a trauma response, not an indication of inherent violence or aggression. Marcus, she said gently, what you experienced growing up would be traumatic for anyone. The way you reacted today makes complete sense when you understand the context of your life experiences. But, that doesn't excuse what I did, Marcus said quickly. I almost hurt you, and that's not okay, no matter what happened to me when I was a kid. Rodriguez was impressed by Marcus's willingness to take responsibility for his actions. Many people in similar situations would have used their traumatic background as an excuse to avoid consequences. You're right that it doesn't excuse your behavior, Rodriguez agreed. But, it does explain it, and that's important for figuring out how to move forward. Move forward? Marcus asked, confusion evident in his voice. Sir, I thought I was going to be discharged or court-martialed or something. That's still a possibility, Rodriguez said honestly. But, I think there might be other options worth exploring first. He turned to Sarah. In your professional opinion, is Marcus someone who could benefit from intensive counseling and trauma therapy? Sarah considered her answer carefully. She had been working with traumatized individuals for years, and she could see both the challenges and the potential in Marcus's case. I think Marcus is an excellent candidate for trauma-informed therapy, she said finally. His willingness to take responsibility for his actions, combined with his obvious intelligence and motivation to succeed, suggests that he could make significant progress with the right support. What would that look like? Marcus asked, hardly daring to hope that he might have a chance to salvage his military career. It would mean intensive individual therapy to address your trauma history, Sarah explained. It would also mean learning new coping strategies for managing stress and emotional triggers. And, it would mean making a commitment to the hard work of healing. Rodriguez was thinking about the various programs available for service members dealing with trauma and behavioral issues. The military had become much more sophisticated about recognizing and treating psychological wounds in recent years. There's a program at the base specifically designed for recruits who are struggling with adjustment issues, Rodriguez said. It combines continued training with intensive counseling and support services. It's demanding, but it has a good success rate for people who are committed to the process. Marcus felt a spark of hope for the first time since the incident in the hallway. These people were talking about helping him succeed rather than simply punishing him for his failure. What would happen to my military career? Marcus asked. Would I still have a chance to serve? If you successfully complete the program, there's no reason you couldn't continue with your naval career, Rodriguez replied. In fact, your experiences might make you particularly effective at helping other service members who are dealing with similar issues. The idea that his painful past might actually become a source of strength and service to others was something Marcus had never considered. Throughout his life, his trauma had been nothing but a burden and a source of shame. There's one condition that's non-negotiable, Rodriguez continued. You have to be completely committed to the process. No half measures, no giving up when things get difficult. This is your one chance to turn your life around. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who were offering him something he had never had before, a genuine opportunity for redemption and growth. The weight of that opportunity was both exciting and terrifying. I want to try, Marcus said quietly. I want to do whatever it takes to become the person I should be. Sarah smiled, recognizing the determination in his voice. She had worked with many trauma survivors, and she could tell when someone was truly ready to do the hard work of healing. It won't be easy, she warned him. Trauma therapy means facing some very painful memories and emotions. There will be times when you want to quit, when it feels like too much to handle. I've been handling pain my whole life, Marcus replied. At least this time, I'll be working towards something better instead of just trying to survive. Rodriguez stood up, indicating that the immediate crisis had been resolved and they were moving into planning mode. All right, here's what's going to happen. Sarah is going to start working with you immediately on crisis management and emotional regulation. I'm going to talk to your commanding officers about transferring you to the special program I mentioned. What about disciplinary action for what happened today? Marcus asked. That will depend on Sarah, Rodriguez said, looking at her questioningly. Sarah took a deep breath before responding. I'm not going to press charges, she said. But, I am going to require that Marcus participate fully in therapy and that we have regular check-ins to monitor his progress. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than shame. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. All of you. I know I don't deserve this chance, but I promise I won't waste it. You do deserve it, Sarah said firmly. Everyone deserves a chance to heal and grow. Your past doesn't define your future, Marcus. You get to decide who you become from here. Sullivan and Kim, who had been quietly observing the conversation, stepped forward. If you need any practical support during your recovery process, don't hesitate to ask, Sullivan said. We've all seen good people struggle with difficult circumstances. The military takes care of its own, Kim added. Even when they're struggling to take care of themselves. Rodriguez gathered his thoughts before addressing Marcus one final time. This conversation doesn't leave this room unless you decide to share it, he said. But, I want you to remember something. Today you made a serious mistake, but you also showed courage by being honest about your struggles. That tells me you have what it takes to succeed. As the group prepared to leave the conference room, Marcus felt like a different person than the one who had walked into the building that morning. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who were genuinely invested in his success and well-being. The road ahead would be difficult, but Marcus finally had something he had never had before, a real chance at building a better life, and people willing to help him do it. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in the same hallway where his life had nearly fallen apart. But everything was different now. He wore the uniform with pride rather than anxiety, and his bearing showed the confidence of someone who had found his place in the world. The intensive therapy program had been the most challenging thing Marcus had ever undertaken. Working with Sarah and a team of trauma specialists, he had learned to understand the connection between his childhood experiences and his emotional reactions. More importantly, he had learned new ways to cope with stress and triggers. The process hadn't been smooth. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when Marcus had wanted to quit. But, with consistent support from Rodriguez, Sarah, and the other program participants, he had gradually built new patterns of thinking and responding to difficult situations. Marcus was now serving as a peer counselor for other recruits struggling with similar issues. His own experience with trauma and recovery made him uniquely qualified to help others who were facing their own demons. On this particular morning, Marcus was walking to meet with a new recruit who had been referred to the program. Jeremy Walsh was 19 years old and had grown up in circumstances similar to Marcus's own background. He had been struggling with anger management and authority issues since arriving at the base. As Marcus approached Sarah's office, he reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day 6 months ago. The shame and self-hatred that had driven his violent outburst had been replaced by understanding and purpose. He still had difficult days, but he now had the tools and support system to handle them constructively. Sarah emerged from her office as Marcus arrived. She smiled warmly, genuinely proud of the progress he had made. Working with Marcus had been one of the most rewarding experiences of her career, watching someone transform from a place of pain and violence to one of healing and service. "How are you feeling about meeting with Jeremy today?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the conference room where the young recruit was waiting. "Nervous, but ready," Marcus replied honestly. "I remember what it felt like to be in his position. If I can help him see that there's another way forward, maybe I can prevent him from making the same mistakes I made." They entered the conference room where Jeremy was sitting slumped in a chair, his body language radiating anger and defensiveness. Marcus immediately recognized the posture and expression. It was like looking into a mirror of his past self. "Jeremy, this is Marcus Thompson," Sarah said, making introductions. "He's one of our peer counselors and someone who has successfully completed our program." Jeremy looked up at Marcus with suspicious eyes. He saw someone who looked successful and put together, someone who probably couldn't understand what it was like to struggle with real problems. "Let me guess," Jeremy said sarcastically. "You're here to tell me how I can turn my life around if I just believe in myself and work hard enough." Marcus sat down across from Jeremy, remembering his own resistance to help when he first arrived at the base. "Actually, I'm here to tell you about the time I nearly destroyed my military career by attacking Ms. Mitchell in this very hallway." Jeremy's expression shifted from sarcasm to surprise. He hadn't expected such honesty from someone who was supposed to be counseling him. "You attacked her?" Jeremy asked, looking between Marcus and Sarah with confusion. "I did," Marcus confirmed. "I was dealing with a lot of unresolved trauma from my childhood, and, when she tried to help me, I completely lost control. I was lucky that some Navy SEALs were nearby to stop me from doing something that would have ruined both of our lives." Sarah nodded, adding her perspective to the story. "Marcus was in crisis, just like you are now. The difference is that he chose to accept help and do the hard work of healing instead of continuing down a destructive path." Over the next hour, Marcus shared his story with Jeremy, holding nothing back. He talked about his childhood trauma, his years in foster care, his time on the streets, and the moment of violence that had nearly ended his naval career before it began. Jeremy listened with growing attention, recognizing similarities between his own experiences and Marcus's background. For the first time since arriving at the base, he was hearing from someone who truly understood what he was going through. "How do I know this program actually works?" Jeremy asked. "How do I know you won't just give up on me when things get difficult?" Marcus considered the question carefully. It was the same doubt he had harbored when he first started therapy with Sarah. "You don't know," Marcus said honestly. "But, I can tell you that these people have never given up on me, even when I gave up on myself. And, I can tell you that the alternative is probably ending up in jail or dead, based on the path you're currently on." The stark honesty cut through Jeremy's defenses in a way that gentle encouragement never could have. Marcus wasn't offering false hope or easy answers. He was offering reality and the possibility of something better. Sarah observed the interaction with professional satisfaction. This was exactly why peer counseling worked so effectively. Jeremy could dismiss advice from counselors and officers, but it was much harder to dismiss someone who had walked the same difficult path. After Jeremy agreed to participate in the program, Marcus walked with Sarah back toward her office. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, creating the same kind of lighting that had been present during his violent outburst months earlier. Do you ever regret what happened that day? Sarah asked as they walked. Marcus thought about the question seriously before answering. I regret that I scared you and put you in danger, he said. But I don't regret that it happened, because it led to everything good that came after. They passed the exact spot where Marcus had lunged at Sarah 6 months earlier. Both of them paused for a moment, remembering how different things had been then. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Rodriguez, Sullivan, and Kim hadn't been there that day, Sarah mused. I don't think I would have actually hurt you, Marcus replied after consideration. I think I would have stopped myself at the last second. But I also think I would have been discharged from the Navy and ended up back on the streets. As they reached Sarah's office, Rodriguez appeared in the hallway. He had been checking on Marcus's progress regularly and had become something of a mentor to the young man. How did the session with Jeremy go? Rodriguez asked. Better than I expected, Marcus replied. I think he's ready to start the real work. Rodriguez smiled with satisfaction. The special program had been his idea, and, seeing its success with recruits like Marcus validated his belief that people could change with the right support and opportunities. I have some news for you, Rodriguez said to Marcus. Your application for advanced training has been approved. If you're interested, you can begin preparing for specialized military counseling certification. Marcus felt a surge of excitement and pride. The opportunity to receive advanced training was something he had barely dared to hope for. It would allow him to help other service members on a much larger scale. I'm very interested, sir, Marcus said. When would I start? Next month, Rodriguez replied. It's a demanding program, but I think you're ready for the challenge. As Rodriguez left to continue his duties, Sarah turned to Marcus with obvious pride in her expression. 6 months ago, you were ready to throw your life away in a moment of rage, she said. Now you're being selected for advanced training to help other people heal from trauma. That's an incredible transformation. Marcus felt humbled by how far he had come, but he also understood that his journey was far from over. Healing from trauma was an ongoing process, not a destination. I know I still have work to do, Marcus said. Some days are still harder than others. But, now I have tools to handle the difficult days, and I have people I can turn to when I'm struggling. That afternoon, Marcus attended his weekly group therapy session with other program participants. The group had become like a family to him, providing support and understanding that he had never experienced before. During the session, a newer participant named David shared his struggles with anger and violence. Marcus listened carefully, remembering his own journey and thinking about how to best help someone who was just beginning the healing process. The hardest part for me was admitting that I needed help, Marcus shared with the group. I had convinced myself that asking for help was a sign of weakness, when actually it takes incredible strength to face your demons and do the work of healing. David nodded, clearly relating to Marcus's experience. How do you handle it when people judge you for your past? He asked. Some people will always judge you based on your worst moments, Marcus replied. But, the people who matter will judge you based on your growth and your commitment to becoming better. Focus on those people and let the others worry about themselves. After the group session, Marcus walked across the base toward the dining hall. He passed groups of recruits going through their training, and he remembered his own early days when everything had seemed overwhelming and impossible. Now, those same training exercises looked manageable and purposeful. Marcus understood that the military wasn't trying to break people down for the sake of being cruel. It was building strength, resilience, and teamwork skills that would serve service members throughout their careers. At dinner, Marcus sat with some of his fellow program graduates who had become close friends. They talked about their plans for the future, their ongoing challenges, and their hopes for helping other people who were struggling with similar issues. You know what's funny, said Maria, another program graduate who had overcome her own trauma history. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over because of my past. Now I realize my past is actually my greatest strength for helping other people. The group nodded in agreement. They had all discovered that their painful experiences, once sources of shame and limitation, could become sources of wisdom and compassion for helping others. As the evening wound down, Marcus returned to his dormitory to prepare for the next day. His room was neat and organized, a reflection of the discipline and structure he had learned to bring to all areas of his life. Before going to sleep, Marcus wrote in the journal that Sarah had encouraged him to keep. Writing about his experiences and emotions had become an important tool for processing difficult feelings and tracking his progress. "Today I helped a new recruit take his first steps toward healing," Marcus wrote. "6 months ago, I was in his position, full of anger and pain with no idea how to move forward. It's amazing how much can change when you have the right support and the willingness to do the work." He paused, thinking about the people who had made his transformation possible. Rodriguez, who had seen potential in him when he couldn't see it himself. Sarah, who had shown him compassion even after he had tried to hurt her. Sullivan and Kim, who had demonstrated that strength could be used to protect rather than harm. "I'm grateful for what happened that day in the hallway," Marcus continued writing. "Not because I'm proud of my behavior, but because it led to everything good that came after." Sometimes our worst moments can become the foundation for our best selves. As Marcus prepared for sleep, he thought about Jeremy and the other recruits who would be starting their healing journeys in the coming weeks. He looked forward to being part of their support system, just as others had been part of his. The last thing Marcus saw before closing his eyes was a photo on his nightstand showing him with his therapy group and counseling team. It was a picture of people who had become his chosen family, the brothers and sisters he had always hoped to find in the military. 6 months earlier, Marcus Thompson had been a broken young man whose past seemed to define his future. Now he was a healer, a mentor, and a living example that people could overcome even the most difficult circumstances with the right support and determination. The recruit who had lunged at a woman in a moment of rage had become a man who dedicated his life to helping others find peace and purpose. It wasn't the ending anyone could have predicted, but it was exactly the ending that Marcus's story needed.